Okay, so you need to change the front bearings on your Ford Windstar. This is an 01 Windstar. Perhaps you've been at a safety inspection and they failed it because your bearings were bad and you're a do-it-yourselfer, you want to change it yourself. We'll show you how to do it. The first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to have to break the outer nut loose. So before you jack it up, just take your hubcap off and then get the appropriate socket. Then put your socket on that nut. Then just use a breaker bar and break that nut loose. It's going to be on there tight. So to shop, we're going to use an impact wrench. The reason I tell you to keep the wheel on the ground because you've got the weight of the vehicle holding this wheel tight. So when you go to break that nut loose, you can get it loose. If you have it up in the air, you'll never get it loose. Now at the very end, when you put this back, do the same thing. When you have that nut back on there, then you go this way to tighten that nut. Okay, now we're going to raise it up in the air and show you how to do the rest of it. Now if you happen to have an impact wrench, just go ahead and use it. We're going to use a hammer here and a punch, and you got to drive that axle in. Doesn't have to go a long way in, but it just has to go in a little bit. Take that washer off. We're going to save a step here and take the caliper and the caliper bracket all off in one step. If the pads are tight, you might have to use a screwdriver and push that piston back, and then the whole assembly should come out. Set it up out of the way and make sure that that brake line is not being stretched. Take your rotor off, and then we're down to the bearing that we need to take out. You're going to have to take the lower control arm loose. Do that, take that bolt out of there. And use a pry bar to be able to pop that loose. And now the spindle will come out. Just let that control arm sit there like that. Now tap on that axle and drive it in further. Should be able to just pop it out. Now just let the axle sit out by itself. There's 3 bolts on the inside. Take them off. If you get those 3 bolts off, the bearing should just come loose and you're ready for the new one. Okay, the inside part where that bearing goes, just take a piece of emery cloth. You're not going to sand hard, you're just going to try and knock some of the rust off, smooth it out a little bit. Make it much easier for that new bearing to go in. Take the new bearing and just insert it right into the hole. Line your bolt holes up. Okay, now we're ready to put the axle back in it. It's one guy can do it. It's better if you got a helper, someone to pull back on that spindle. Just have to insert it in there. When you get a partial way in, your axle is sticking out, be sure and put that washer back on, and there's enough threads to get the nut started. If you get that nut close to the axle, it makes it much easier to get that ball joint back in place. Now with that axle all the way in, you can press down on the control arm, get your lower ball joint back in place. Take a hammer and drive it up. Put your nut and bolt back in. Slide your rotor back on. Now if you need brakes, this would be a good time to do that. But this one's, the brakes were okay, so we're putting the rotor back on. The 2 bolts back in it. Now you're ready for your wheel. Now we've already put this on tight with the impact, but if you haven't used one, lower it back down and use your driver on that to get that nut tight again. Hubcap back on. You're all done, ready for the other side.
And that is how it's done.